Hi everyone, in this week's video I'm going to show you how to paint this really pretty tulip with easy to follow instructions. Let's go! As always, I begin by tracing down my drawing and I'll put an information card on the top of the screen explaining how I do this. A limited palette today of cadmium yellow, French ultramarine, bright violet and quinacridone magenta, but use the colours that you have. All the materials will be in the description box below. I've mixed bright violet with a tiny bit of blue here, along with two green mixes, one having more blue and one having more yellow. I begin by glazing over the leaf of the tulip so that we're working wet and wet, making sure that I stay within the pencil lines like this. It's important that you stay within the perimeters of the pencil line because that is where you're going to drop your colour. I'll refer to these green tones as the bluer mix and the yellower mix just for ease. I begin by placing the bright violet wash where you can see the outside edge of this leaf. This will give a really natural looking outside edge where the light is hitting this particular leaf. Here I begin to drop in the yellow-green mix and let it splurge gently onto the water that we've applied. This makes it really easy to blend into the paper, as you can see. I'm using a number 6 size spotter brush for this, but just use whatever brush that you have. It really doesn't matter, the brush that you feel comfortable with. Watercolour is all about having fun, even when you're painting botanical art. You can see how I'm pulling down the paint into the water, just giving it a natural looking blur, and I'm mixing it with the blue tone and the yellow tone like this to give it a sense of realism and for it to look natural and organic. I'm going to complete this process on the other two leaves and the stem. I recommend you watch this video all the way through, particularly so if you're new to watercolour painting. It will give you a better understanding of how the layering process works and how it can look wrong halfway through, but you'll see how it comes together. Not only that, I will put the line drawing and the photograph for this tutorial right at the very end of this video after the outro, that's the bit with the music, so that you can pick it up from there. And I'll also put the line drawing and the photograph in the Facebook group, details of which will be in the description box below. So do consider joining us there. You can post up your finished paintings there as well. I'm going back to the purple mix. Remember, this is bright violet with a little bit of green, and just adding it on the outside edge here. Paying close attention to my reference photograph. Once again, just dropping in the yellow-green mix. Remember that these are just yellow and blue mixed together. One has more blue and one has slightly more yellow to just vary the tones of the green. It's important that they're not flat and they look natural. It's easier to paint larger areas wet and wet as I'm doing here because it just means that you can move the paint around. We're going to be adding the detail a little bit later. Just using the tip of my brush to push it into the corners, as you can see. When the paint is dry, you see me mixing two petals of paint. The first one is bright violet and the second one being cadmium yellow. It looks a little bit muddy here. I think it's a little bit contaminated with paint from before. So cadmium yellow, and I've added a tiny bit of the bright violet to this. And once again, I'm glazing over the flower head with just plain water so that we can drop these colours in. And I'm going to be dipping in between the two colours that I have on my palette here, once again to give it a really natural and organic look, paying close attention to my reference photograph. You can see how by working wet in wet, the colours gently merge together, making it look really, really pretty. And again, it makes it easier to apply the paint at this stage. We will be glazing over the colours a little bit later once the paint has dried. And colour glazing is such a wonderful way of adjusting your colours, as you will see as we work through this tutorial. I absolutely adore painting tulips. They're really super easy to paint and give really fast results. What's your favourite flower to paint? Just let me know. Drop it in the comment box below, or just drop in to say hi. I absolutely love hearing from you. You can see me here as usual, just dropping in these colours one by one and blurring them together softly with a brush. And adding a little bit of green to the stalk here. Now that the paint is dry, I have a flat synthetic brush here and I'm using it just damp to wiggle outside some of the pencil line that I've gone outside slightly. It just means you can tidy up the edges of your painting without disturbing the paint underneath. I'm now using a number 3 size spotter just to enhance some of the colours, cleaning it down and just blending it with the damp brush so that the colours merge together like this. It just makes it look really, really natural. Once again, I'm dipping in between these two green tones, the blue tone and the yellow tone, and I'm applying it on the leaf, as you can see. I'm leaving a little gap towards the top here because that is where it's slightly faded where the light is hitting it, and it's important that we retain some of these elements, otherwise it just looks too flat. I'm adding a little bit more French ultramarine to the blue tone. I didn't feel it was quite blue enough, and now I'm adding a little bit more yellow. Just varying the colours as I go through. You can see how these colours are different on the palette. Just always using my reference photograph as a guide. You'll notice that the consistency of the paint is slightly thicker at this point. It just helps with the layering process, or the glazing process as it's also known. You can see me here begin to pull up the beginnings of they're not veins, it's almost like a pattern that's on the leaf here. And we'll be glazing over it again a bit later, but it just helps give us some form and help us go in the direction that we need to go with this painting. And you can see me here using this little spotter brush, just wiggling it into the paint. It's almost the same process as colouring in. That's why these little spotter brushes make it so much easier to apply paint. I've always used them for my botanical work, and in fact all kinds of painting. I just find them really, really easy to use. You can see me here just glazing over the stem with the yellow-green tone that we mixed up. Don't worry if your green tones aren't exactly the same match, it will still work. Just use your discretion and just add your different shades. The important thing is that they are different to each other. And once again, once you've applied the paint, clean your brush in clean water, pat it on your kitchen towel and blend it into the existing washes. That gives a really soft edge. If you find that your paint is sticking to your paper, you may want to just add a little bit of water to help it move around. I'm using a hot press paper today. This means that it has a really smooth surface. You can see me once more adding some more pigment to these tones and applying it onto the outer leaf here, adding more blue to the top, which means that it's in shadow, so it creates this illusion of it being darker, which of course it is. By the way, if you are enjoying this video and you'd like to watch a tutorial every single week, then you may want to consider subscribing and hitting the bell notification. That way you'll be notified when I launch new content every single week on YouTube. You can see at this point how the painting looks slightly untidy. When I started painting, I used to give up thinking that this was wrong and it looks a mess, but it isn't the case. Watercolour is a strange medium and it tricks you into thinking that things shouldn't look this way, but I promise you, if you continue, this is how it's meant to look. So don't give up if you reach this point and think that you've done it wrong. You can also see here that in the sort of where the two leaves overlap, there's a bit of a bloom, but don't worry about that. Everything is meant to be as it's meant to be. If your paint on your palette feels a little bit sticky, just add a little bit of water to get it moving again, as I've done here. Using the tip of my brush to get right into the corner of that pencil line. By the way, people have asked me whether I remove my pencil after painting. I never do, I just don't think it's necessary. Just building up the colours slowly like this. I'm just using a number 6 size spotter here to glaze over everything with a plain water wash. That brings everything nicely together for me. But we have to let it dry. I've cleaned down my palette now that everything's dry, and I'm adding some bright violet in one petal here and a separate petal of quinacridone magenta and another petal of cadmium yellow. Using my number 2 size spotter to mix these together, and I'm going to use the number 2 this time to apply onto the flower head, as you can see. I'm going to dip in between these 3 colours as I see fit by looking at my reference photograph. I begin by applying the quinacridone magenta, then switch into the bright violet, and so on. In the middle of this side of the tulip, there's a highlight that runs through the centre, and I'm working around this, but I'm going to be lifting it out a little bit later as well, just to give it some definition. It's really important that this highlight is kept so that we can see the gloss of the tulip head. I'm applying the yellow tone towards the base of the tulip because it definitely has a more yellow hue there. But it's also important that we keep these tonal values. Some of the tonal values are light and some of them are dark and some of them are mid-tones, and it's really essential to our painting that we keep these tones in place. Without the darker values, it will just look really, really flat, and we don't want that. Once again, go into my number 2 size flat synthetic brush. You can see me here lifting out some of that highlight where the paint has gone over the edge. And once more, flicking between these 3 colours. If you are enjoying this method of painting and botanical painting is your thing, then do join us over on our Patreon site, and I will put a link in the description box below. So at this stage, we're still building up the colours and layers of the tulip. We will put all the detail in a little bit later. So as I keep saying, don't be alarmed if you think it doesn't look right at this stage. It's really important and it's part of the watercolour process. And you can see how I've deliberately left a little gap here, which I'm now working around the outside with a slightly darker valued colour. And just glazing over with a little bit of the yellow tone. Once again, I'm using my number 2 size flat synthetic brush to just wiggle out some of that highlight to make it look really, really soft so that we can build around it a bit later. Once again, strengthening the colours with the colours on the palette. And you can see me just dipping in and out of them as I feel necessary, and you can do the same with the colours that you've mixed. I'm using the tip of my brush to outline the petals here because it just gives it a really strong definition. It just makes it jump off the page. So I'm just using the tip of my number 0 size brush to do this. And you can see how it makes a real difference at this point. Now you can see me using a wiggling motion to create some form within the tulip head. And always blending it in with a damp brush. This tulip is really beginning to come together now. And once again, lifting out with a synthetic brush. I've mixed cadmium yellow with a little bit of quinacridone magenta, and I'm now dipping back to the other mix. As long as you keep moving your paint between the 3 colours, you'll be fine. Just make sure that when you look at your veining, as I'm doing now, the yellow tone will go where the yellow tone is, and obviously the orangey tone will go where the orangey colour is. It'll all make sense. You can see me just adding a little bit of lines in here and there just to give it a bit of shape and a bit of form. And the yellow tone on the bottom. This really brightens it up. Again, colour glazing really makes your painting sing. If we were to mix this colour by adding the 2 tones together, it would look flat, but when we glaze a colour on top of another colour, it looks absolutely beautiful. And using the same colour to draw in some veins here, to make it look really, really natural. As I said, if we put the purple tone up the top, it wouldn't have looked right. So just look at your reference photograph and see what you see and paint it onto the flower. So now that it's dry and I've glazed everywhere with water, just checking that that paint is absolutely dry before we do anything, using the number 0 size brush to add some more detail here. Once again, dip in between the colours that I've mixed on my palette. This time really enhancing the outside of those petals, using the tip of my brush to sharpen everything up. Just to remind you that the reference photograph and the line drawing will be at the very end of this video, after the outro, but also, as always, I will put them in the Facebook group, also called The Wonders of Watercolour, and all the information will be in the description box underneath. So do consider joining us there. We have a fast-growing community, and you can also post up your finished paintings on the Facebook group. Once again, I'm enhancing the little veins down the centre of the tulip. Because we've layered up using thin, fine layers, it gives us the opportunity to keep adding colour, and you can see the underlying colours underneath the colours. It just makes it look really, really beautiful and organic. Now I'm beginning to pull out a few, I don't know whether you call them veins, but little marks, so you can see the way that the tulip head is shaped by pulling these little lines out like this. I think they are veins. Maybe you can just drop it in the comments below to let me know what they're actually called. We'll call them veins. Because the paint on my palette has slightly dried, it makes it easier to apply it to the smaller areas here. If the washes had been really, really watery, I wouldn't have had the same amount of control. So at this point, let your colours dry on your palette. That's a really good tip. Once they're slightly dry, you have to move them around, but once they're slightly dry, it just gives you that level of control that you are unable to get with a watery wash. Once again, just building up those colours. And put it in those veins. When I'm applying the veins on the outside of this petal, you can see I'm adding it in a sort of curved shape that gives the illusion of that petal being curved, which is what we want. And I'm using the tip of my brush here to outline where the tulip head hits that leaf. This really sharp outline makes a huge difference, so do consider doing this. I'm adding a little bit of the yellow colour to the bright violet, and I'm enhancing the top of the leaf here. I felt that it had lost a little bit of the lilac colour that we'd have put at the beginning. So again, a little bit more of the French ultramarine just to give that lilac colour a boost. Because colour is relative, sometimes when we apply other colours, it makes us see things very differently. So at this stage, I added a little more to enhance it. And always, as always, blending it in using a soft, damp brush. The colours are now dry, so I've remixed the green colours as you can see here. But before I apply them, I'm going to use my flat synthetic brush to lift out the colours just to create the illusion of some more veining within the leaf. This is fairly easy to do. Just damp your brush and wiggle it as I'm doing here, and then pat it with your kitchen towel. You'll find that the paint lifts off really, really easily. And now, using my number 0 size spotter, I'm adding a bit of bright violet to some of the green tone, and you can see I'm going to be putting a little bit of the French ultramarine with it as well, and a little bit of bright violet, so it's pretty much everything, just to put in the dark shadowy area within this petal here. I found that it was too light at the moment and needed adjusting tonally. That's why I've mixed this darker colour. And I'll just dip between these greens that I have on my palette. Same as before, I've just mixed cadmium yellow with French ultramarine in different ratios so that one has a more yellow tone and one has a more blue tone, and somewhere in between the two. I'm going to use the dark colour that I've just mixed up. That's French ultramarine with bright violet and a little bit of green for the really dark areas where the shadow hits the leaf here, where the stalk joins the leaf like this. And as always, blending it in. Now that the paint has been lifted out on the leaves, what I'm doing is I'm using the tip of this fine brush to outline the bits that we've lifted out. This gives it definition and it makes it look as if it's been done on purpose, which of course it has. It gives the leaf a bit of texture and it makes it look natural. By simply just outlining these little bits of lift out. I'm using the mid-tone and dark tone of the green here to outline around the stalk onto this leaf base, so you can see how it makes the stalk just jump out. So it's by simply putting the darker colour behind it, it really makes it jump away from the leaf, so you can see it a little more. I hope that makes sense. And using the darker colour to outline it, once again, as I did with the tulip head. It's really important that you add the darker green colour behind the stalk where it hits the leaf, because it makes it jump out. So just be careful where you put it and just sharpen up those edges as you go. And just continue to do this until your painting is complete. At the end of this video, remember I will put the line drawing and the reference photograph really briefly, but if you have enjoyed this video, do give it a thumbs up. It really does help to support me on this wonderful YouTube platform.